Hello. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Alan Ibbotson. Welcome to YDAF Live. It's the last one of our short season. Thanks for watching, for those of you that have been with us. For those of you who don't know, YDAF is the wisdom that you didn't ask for, but suddenly can't live without. And our mission is quite simple, actually. It is to build a wiser world of work, to get all that wisdom off the motivational posters and the quotes and into the hearts and minds of everyone that we work with, specifically and especially our leaders. As many of you know, I am an executive coach, and I have worked with some really brilliant people who have taught me so much over the years. And so what I want to do with YDAF Live is to bring you the benefit of their wisdom right here to your desk. And today I am talking to one of the most amazing people that I have ever met in my life, period, personally or professionally. And she is a transformative figure, I have to say, in many lives, including mine. And if you know her, then I know that you would say the same. Carolyn Costin is my guest today, and she is an author, a speaker, but importantly, she's the founder of Monte Nido, which is a series of eating disorder clinics across the country. She sold the company several years ago, but that's when she and I met originally. And she went on to found the Carolyn Costin Institute, which is a training institute, a certified training institute to certify eating disorder coaches to help people who are in recovery after treatment to succeed back at home in developing healthy eating habits, because we all need help making transitions. And so Carolyn saw that gap, and being the empathic individual that she is, wanted to fill it. So I have to say that Carolyn is the very definition of the word empathy, but I've also seen her kick ass when necessary. So it is my great pleasure and absolute privilege to bring you Carolyn Costin. Carolyn, are you here?
I'm here. Thank you so much for that introduction. That was very kind.
Oh, it's just straight from the heart. How are you, love? It's 9 a.m. on the West Coast. It's 12:05 here. How you doing?
I'm excited. It's such a good topic, and I just like being able to chat with you. So this is a good excuse for it. So that's
It is
nice.
a good excuse for it. And we get to share your wisdom with the people that we both know, the people that I know that you don't, and vice versa. So I'm really thrilled that you're here. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me.
So, when I was thinking about the topics for the season, empathy was clearly one that, kind of was front of mind, especially given everything that we've been through over the last, couple of years. We don't seem to be out of it, and it doesn't look like we're going to be out of it anytime soon. And I'm running a poll actually right now on LinkedIn about, what do you want from a leader if you had to pick one thing? And it is a close call, I have to say, but number one in the lead, guess what?
Yeah, that's great. It's empathy is leading. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So empathy is a superpower is the title of this episode. I've always believed that. I think you do too. But tell me tell us why you think that's the case.
Well, I want to make a distinction between it is a two-word thing. It is a superpower, but I was thinking about this and I thought it's not a superpower in the sense that it's only relegated to people like Wonder Woman, I mean, it is, I don't want people to think that it's hard to achieve, but it definitely is a superpower in all that it can do. And that I don't even think we can imagine a world without it. What if we could not share in the feelings of others? What if we could not put ourselves in the perspective of other people, which is what empathy really is? Empathy is putting yourself in someone else's shoes and getting it from their perspective, not what would it be like, or, oh, I've felt that before, but I need to get in it and feel in it. It comes actually from a German word called feel into, which I think is so interesting. So
Mhm.
it's a superpower in that sense, because it's a game changer actually in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways.
And and you, I feel like you have built your entire career on empathy, almost in many ways.
Well, in my case, one of the things that happened was I was the first person to stand up at an international conference and say people with eating disorders can be recovered. I'm recovered. And I had people there with me that I had treated who were recovered and had been recovered from an eating disorder for anywhere from 5 to 10 years.
Could you just define that for folks who don't understand the, what that means, and sort of that definition of recovery, and how it's how
Yeah.
that's defined?
Well, up until that point, I mean, the 12-step programs were being sort of loosely applied to eating disorders. So people were saying, treat people with eating disorders like you treat someone who has alcoholism. And they're always recovering one day at a time because they have a disease. And I just didn't see it that way. First of all, it didn't make any sense to me in the sense that you can't get food out of your life. And with alcohol, you just have to get it out of your life. But with
That's true.
food, I had to learn how to have a healthy relationship with food again. I had to change my brain, not decide my brain is permanently different than other people's, and therefore I will always be recovering. So I stood up and started saying it, and that has turned into working with someone. I'll give you a good example from lived experience. And lived experience right now is one of the ways that empathy is making sort of a reemergence in the mental health field, because peer support and people who have what's called lived experience, there's all kinds of research showing that they are very helpful in areas anywhere from depression to schizophrenia. It just, the reason I'm doing the coaching thing right now is nobody ever trained people to be eating disorder coaches. But anyway, so lived experience, I would, when I first started meeting with people who had eating disorders. In fact, someone said to me, "You should see this girl because she has that thing you had." And this is back in 1978 or 9. And at first, I was a little like, "Ugh, I don't know if I want to do that." I felt maybe too close to home. But then when I met with her and realized that I had such a resonance with what she was going through, and was able to ask questions other people hadn't asked, and was able to see things in a way differently. I started using it, and then I hired recovered people. And then when I opened the first residential, which you mentioned, Monte Nido, I hired people who were not just with lived experience, but who had recovered. So they were able to have all kinds of empathy, but it doesn't mean not challenging. Like you said,
Right.
empathy is where you stand in the ground, you get it from somebody's perspective, you try to get an essence of what this feels like for them, but you still have to, set boundaries and tell the truth without judgment if you're going to help people get better.
Yeah, so I love that these principles that you have, and anybody who's worked with me has heard me quote you verbatim, Carolyn. By the way, for the last several years, ever since I've known you, because I am such an advocate for this idea that we stay out of judgment, that we tell the truth without judgment, and that we don't get too attached to the end result. Could you just clarify that whole thought process for everyone?
It comes from an anthropologist, Angelus Arian, who studied cultures that lived the longest and were the happiest. And she came up with these sort of 4 basic truths. And they're actually, when you really get into it and you look at the definitions and all that, it's Buddhist principles. So it's show up, which means show up and really be there. And
Wholeheartedly.
to me that means being empathic. When you show up and you are there, you're not just there with your body, taking notes. Your soul is present in the room. So show up and then pay attention. And that means pay attention to not just the words, but the body language, what's going on around you. And it also is, what do you choose to pay attention to? And then tell the truth, but without any negativity, without criticism, without judgment, which is,
That's really hard.
is hard. It's one of the hardest. But I think the hardest is probably, don't be attached to the results, which people get wrong all the time. They think it means you don't care, or you give up. No, you really want something to happen. Like if I'm working with a client, I really want to be able to help her recover, for example. But if she doesn't do something, if we have a great session and she goes out and binges and purges, I better not get upset about it. I have
Right.
to stay in my own place and not become affected or offended or have my own agenda that she
Take
gets
it
credit.
personally, right? Yeah, think that you failed or whatever. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and having an agenda, it's really the principle of acceptance versus resistance. And I think being an empathic person, which I know I am now, I think it comes in many ways. I mean, it's partly learned, and it's partly, we know about mirror neurons and all that stuff, which contributes to our ability to empathize. But that can get kind of confusing. But I think we can train ourselves, and I certainly was trained from as a little girl. I remember going into a restaurant in downtown Los Angeles, and my father was these big as life kind of guy, and he would go into the restaurant and the owners would know him and he would sit and play the piano. But he also took me at 7 years old into the washroom, stood at the door, waited for the black woman to come out who was the attendant in the washroom and tell me her name and introduce me to her. And so, in some ways, getting the sense about all these different, seeing it also from her perspective and not thinking that was any, he treated her exactly the way he treated the restaurant owner.
Yeah, that's awesome. What a great model to have, like from such a young age. So it was really baked into you from the start. So, do you think that people can be trained to be empathic, and that it's not just
Yeah.
a natural gift that people have?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I mean, how about that book in the maybe 1960, 61? Do you remember that book, Black Like Me?
I do not.
Oh, Alan. Oh my God. This guy, I forget his name.
Writing it
It
down.
would probably be scandalous now, but I mean, he actually changed lives by deciding to paint his skin black and go to a southern town and see what it was like to really, not just from a distance, oh, I feel sorry for those people. That's a little bit, well, I don't want to get into
Sympathy, yeah.
the difference between empathy and sympathy, but empathy is, I'm literally going to go get in their shoes. And the book, it's an old book, but it is unbelievable what happened to him and how he was treated differently, the just because his skin was black. I mean, he got beat up, he got threatened
Yeah.
by the KKK. It's a fascinating story, but people learned from that story. So I
Mhm.
for sure think that we can teach empathy.
Yeah, I think, I've seen other examples, sort of parallel examples of that. Like, for example, a trans woman spoke at the TED conference, um, because she had an experience of living in the world as male and living in the world as
Oh,
female.
yeah,
And so
exactly.
she had this sort of lived experience of,
Yeah.
one and the other. And it was a really great talk, actually. And so that lived experience is more powerful than anything.
Yeah, that sounds good. And if we don't have the lived experience, then empathy is doing our best. Like, for example, Anna, and she is a fabulous therapist. She doesn't have the lived experience of having an eating disorder, but being around people who are expressing empathy towards people with eating disorders and explaining, oh no, this is what it's like for them, or the clients themselves explaining it, it doesn't mean you can't have it. And it's a practice. It is something that, I think you continue to, I wouldn't say work at, unless you're, okay, well, here you go. Unless you're a narcissist. And narcissist, and by the way, narcissist, people think they don't have empathy. A psychopath doesn't have empathy. They have the inability to feel what, or have shame or remorse or anything. But a narcissist is holding it back. A narcissist, I think, can have it, but they have to learn that it's not a threat to them.
Yeah, well, a narcissist will have their own agenda, right? And so they will do what they can show it, but it's with their own agenda, kind of thing.
Yeah, like you'll see him show it for a pet or something,
Yeah.
So it's in there. But there's fear involved and things like that, which is why I think it doesn't happen in leadership in companies sometimes, because I think company leaders sometimes think, oh, if I have too much empathy, I'm going to have to make these decisions, or I'm going to have to give them a lot, or
Yeah, I want to ask you about that because I think, and Anna made it. Anna Kowalski made it onto the session, so she's here with us right now.
oh, she is. Oh,
yeah, she's here.
no.
She is. Hey, Anna. We're getting some great comments actually. So, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We will be absolutely responding to some of these great comments that are coming in. But I think you just hit on something, Carolyn. A couple of things actually. One is, okay, can it be taught? I think that there are different levels of empathy, and if you listen to somebody like Daniel Goleman, for example, who talks about emotional intelligence, he labels it as sort of cognitive empathy, and then more of an emotional empathy, which is about connection. So cognitive being I can understand what you're thinking or why you would feel a certain way.
Yeah.
Just from a sort of a cognitive perspective.
I get it cognitively.
I get it. I understand what it is. Yeah. I don't necessarily agree. I don't necessarily feel it, but I understand what it is that you're feeling. And then the emotional empathy, which is, of course, much more about connection, right? It's what Brené Brown talks about when she talks about empathy, the perspective taking and the ability to stay out of judgment, and then recognize and communicate the emotion that you see in somebody else. It's more like that kind of empathy is the emotion.
Yeah, I feel like it's a little bit deeper in the sense that how people sometimes say, don't just stand there, do something. Mm-hmm. It's sort of the opposite.
My entire life when I was a kid.
Okay, well, this empathy in a way is the opposite. Don't just do something, stand there. And it means stand in the present. I like to think of it as this sort of deep resonance that you have. I'll give you a really good example. I got hit by a car once, and it was a big Winnebago, and it knocked me across a few lanes of the freeway into the center divider. The first person who showed up at the scene said, "You are so lucky." Okay, this is me. I'm holding onto the steering wheel. I look at him and I'm thinking to myself, lucky is not how I'm feeling right now. Okay. The second person who showed up said, "Oh my God, you must be so scared. You're going to be okay. People are coming. We're going to get the window open." I was terrified, but the first person had a sense about it, and just didn't, but wasn't standing there being in it with me.
Right.
In some ways, empathy is transformative in that, because we know when you have shared experiences, when you feel understood, you start to begin to feel safe, begin to take risks, feel engaged. Which is why it's so important in leadership, why it's so important.
Absolutely. But to your point earlier on, and talking about Anna, for instance, I don't know that you have to have lived experience to be able to empathize with somebody, in a situation, right? I had an accident too, as you know, and it was actually funny story for me is like the people that came in and said, "Oh, how are you doing? How are you feeling today? Is it rough?" And they were sort of sympathizing with me. I was like, "Get them out of here. I don't want them in this room. Like, get them out." The people who came in and said, "All right, you look a bit rough today. Like, you need to brush your hair, mate." and made me laugh were the people that I wanted around me, because to me that was empathy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because they understood me.
There's
They
a lot of
understood me that that's what I wanted.
yeah, there's a lot of difference in terms of uh, knowing it's sort of knowing what the other person needs, and
Yeah,
that's a hard thing to figure out. Those
yeah,
who really knew you needed to hear that kind of thing, and so in
exactly.
some ways it's hard. I mean, going back to the training thing, I mean, another way I think we train, I remember, see, here's a good one from my mother. I would complain about stuff that other kids would do to me, and she would always want me to sit me down and say, let's look at it from so and so's perspective. And one time, this kid, our next door neighbors, who were really, really poor, came over and he said, can I borrow a cup of sugar? And of course, my mom gives him the sugar and he goes in the backyard and eats it. So I come into my mom and I go, Mom, Bobby, you don't, he's not borrowing the sugar, he's eating it. So she sits me down and explains, I know, and it's okay. And I'm not, no, I'm not going to, he's not going to be punished. And he doesn't have that at his house. And I was just trying to be kind. It seems weird now to think of that, but those kinds of things where we start to learn, our brain starts to get messages that help us to understand, oh yeah, I can put myself in somebody else's shoes, even if I might never have that experience.
That story explains so much about you, Carolyn.
Yeah, well, my mom was a hard act to follow. I'm telling you,
Well,
I
you followed
actually,
her. You followed her, and
yeah,
then
I
some.
try. I mean, I try. She was very. I never heard my mom say a bad word about anybody. But again, she probably, in some ways, that's the downside, about uh, how do you overdo it? How do
Yeah, let's talk about that, because
well,
I think you kind of touched on it earlier. I think people for whom empathy is a little bit difficult, they find it hard to kind of empathize with people, at least in an emotional sense. Struggle with the word and with the idea that they have to be empathic, because in my opinion, to be empathic is a non-negotiable now. If you're in a leadership role, it's just non-negotiable. At a minimum, you need to be able to understand what people are feeling and why, so that you can meet them where they are and be helpful, as their leader. But a lot of in my coaching work, what I find is that a lot of people find this word empathy a little bit terrifying, because they feel like they're going to be asked to sort of be all touchy feely,
yeah.
when it's not really their thing. Like, what do you think about all of that?
Well, they are afraid they're going to have to be touchy feely, and they're afraid that they're going to have to be vulnerable themselves, which they are in a way.
Yeah.
But also, I think they're afraid that it's going to display some kind of weakness or something. And I think it's the opposite. In fact, there's research that shows that the higher an employee scores their boss as being empathic, the longer they stay at the job,
Yep.
the more retention that company has, the higher performance, engagement, productivity. It's unbelievable when you look at it, and it just correlates. Here's how I rate my boss, and here's all those other things. So
Yep.
it's not really what people think. It's the difference between giving your employees, some kind of Christmas card and a little bonus, let's say, or having a Christmas party and showing up yourself to it and being there with them.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
difference in the way people feel about that. One time, you're going to love this. When I opened up a residential treatment center it was the one I opened in New York. And I decided I want to see what it's like to spend the night and be a patient here. Let me see what it's like before we got too far in it. And there was a few patients, and I just thought I want to see. So two things that clients complained about is, one, at night we would have we would set an alarm on the doors so that if they opened the door, the overnight staff would know. They could be downstairs or something. They would know that the door was open, that somebody was having an issue. So when it came time for her to come up to my room and set the alarm, I go, "Oh, no, no, you don't have to do that." And she said, "Well, that's what we do. We set the alarms." And I'm thinking, shit, if I want to walk out, if I want to walk down the hall, I don't want everyone to be alerted. And I went, shit. So I had to do it. I had a whole new perspective on it. And then the next morning, we didn't allow caffeine, partly because people use it as an appetite suppressant. It interferes with medications. So we didn't allow caffeine. So the first morning, I'm like, oh my God. I know. By the third, I did it for 3 days. The third morning, I had a staff member go get me some coffee. Okay, I didn't do very well on that, but I did in the sense that I went in group and talked to the clients about, I get it. I sat in your
Yeah.
shoes and I get it. And I will think, it's not that I didn't care or listen before, but I listened in a new way, in a visceral in a visceral way. And I still had to say, here's why the rule is. I'm not changing it just because of my own
Right.
experience. That would be wrong. I
Yeah.
still, as a leader, you still have to make decisions for the good of the entire company, for the good of the employees, for the good of the customers. So, as a clinician, if you have a client, you can just empathize and all that. But as a leader, sometimes you have to make decisions and display empathy at the same time you are, say, letting someone go, you know?
I mean, look, you and I have worked together as well. Is how we originally met several years ago, and then we became pals because we connected in such a great way. But I've seen you do that too. I have seen you do that. I have seen you deliver a tough message, not laying somebody off, which was the example that you gave, but I've seen you deliver a tough message, but do it in a way that is kind, that is empathic, but that is also a big swift kick up the backside.
You
So
have to if you want people to.
yeah, and but that's really, that's kind of a dialectical, right, in clinical terms. But like, help us understand how you do that, because that's an incredibly difficult thing to do, and I'd love to get your perspective on that one.
Well, I think the guide for me is always truth without judgment. First of all, if I am really upset at the person, which has happened before. I mean, I had a client once throw up in another client's coat. She just purged into her coat, and it really ticked me off. And I'm going to go out there, and I could feel it in my body. So at that point, I know this, and this is where we can learn skills. Tell yourself, if my body isn't neutral, it's not the time to convey a message. So I realized, and I turned to somebody else, another therapist at the time, and said, "You have to go deal with her because I'm losing my shit." You know.
Oh, okay. So that's
So
where the emotional self-awareness piece is so important. You have to know if you're actually capable of doing it, or if you're too kind of
if
upset.
you're agitated, if you're
Right.
triggered in some way,
Yeah.
so for me, and this is what I teach, and I taught these 4 principles all the time to the clients and the staff. You have to try to get your body back into a neutral place. Then you can go deliver and say, that's not acceptable here. I know you probably must be feeling horrible that you even were so out of control you did that. But now we have to have you on higher observations because you aren't in control of yourself. Your healthy self is not strong enough to keep you from doing those things.
Right.
That, to me, that's empathy, and that's containment, and that's saying,
Yeah.
I'm going to help you, and I remind, that's what you hired me for. But
Yeah.
when you're agitated or upset, it's really hard to do that. So you have to, so that's why I think when you start breaking it down and putting it into language, then I think you can teach empathy, because anybody who follows that principle, get
Yeah.
your body back to neutral. And I've always been sorry when I've been really mad and I'm writing an email and I'm really mad. My husband reminds me, you're not going to send that, are you? Because that's not practicing what you preach. Every time I've said I don't care and sent it, I've been sorry every single time, because the person is going to hear my anger or my little snarky comments that I think I've so well disguised, and they're not going to get the message.
Do you know how comforting it is, Carolyn, to hear you say that, that even you feel that? Because as somebody who is the most empathetic
Everybody.
person in the world, probably you, um, I think it's actually reassuring for me, certainly, and for probably a lot of others to know that even you go through that. And so I guess you're getting it out of your system so that you can get back to your own baseline and then be kind of useful and
Yeah,
helpful.
and it's usually when I've been attacked and I feel like it's very unfair. It's not usually when somebody does something. It's usually when it's a personal thing, and I feel they don't know me. This is really unfair, and I want to get back and say a bunch of stuff, and it's not useful. I need to stand in their shoes and figure out what is the pain that people are feeling that they are saying this to me or about me. Where's the truth in it, even though it's hard to see? There must be some sense or some way or some.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think all of us have some feelings like that. I mean, I think that, okay, so let's go back to the leaders and clinicians. Um, well, as a clinician, one of the hard things about empathy, when you really get have empathy. I told you a couple of stories where the overdoing. Let's talk about the overdoing. The You can become an empathaholic. You can just be where you
Ruinous empathy. Yeah.
where now or where you have idiot compassion.
Idiot compassion. I love the way you say that. Idiot compassion.
Yeah, idiot
Although
compassion.
is idiot non-judgmental, Carolyn? Just saying. Not
No,
sure.
no, it's not really. But it's not my term. It's not my term. I'm
Oh,
trying
okay,
to
that's all
figure
right
out a
then.
much more neutral term. Um, uh, it's a Pima Chodron. That's where I first heard it
Oh,
from.
yeah. Love
Um,
that.
yeah, female Buddhist monk. And she talks about how, like, you don't, for example, you don't have all this compassion for your abusers and just let them to continue to abuse you. You know,
Right.
there, and
No.
that's an obvious example, but you always have to be willing to maintain your boundaries. And like we were talking about a little bit earlier before, you like this person who I had to fire once for stealing drugs, and I was incredibly empathic about the fact that she must have felt compelled. She had an addiction. Somebody else was on painkillers for a back injury and she stole them. And sitting there and talking with her and getting her into treatment, keeping her on the books as an employee, so that she had the insurance. I mean, some people thought that that was like going too far. I don't think that's going too far. I think that's, you take care of it. You say, no, you can't work here, but yes, you need treatment, and being kind as you deliver it. Um,
I've seen there's somebody who who comes to mind as well who has done something similar. For an employee who was stealing from the company because of dire straits, and and went as far as sort of bailing them out and giving them the job back. And it was an incredibly close relationship after that. I mean, it's a very powerful thing, but it takes a lot of courage and
yeah.
willingness to do that. I think, yeah.
And sometimes you have to do that with clients who are continually doing things and lying and getting away with doing all these behaviors. But when you understand it from their point of view, you have a different way of seeing it. You still might have to, at some point, have your own limitations. At some
Yeah.
point you have your own way that you have to take care of yourself and maybe and or
Yeah.
other people. But you have to be careful when you're like, here's some examples where empathy can be, and I think because I got it so much from my mom. I mean, one example of is when, I think I told you this story. My husband, we were on a horseback trip in Yellowstone, and Bruce uh, fell off the horse and broke his arm. And he got up and he said, I'm going into shock right now. And he leans against the horse, and all of a sudden I start feeling like I'm feeling what he's feeling. Like, that's so weird. It's so weird to have the same feeling. And then I woke up and I had fainted and fallen off my horse. I I didn't have very good boundaries in that moment, you know. But it used to happen to me with clients. They would have back pain and I would get back pain. I don't know what to call that, but I think that's going beyond empathy, and that's getting yourself into trouble. You have to
Yeah,
stay in your place and be able to sense what the other person is feeling or understand it from their perspective. But you stay in your own place,
yeah.
own
I
lane.
talk about it with my own clients. It's like understanding what does this person need from you right now, and it's not necessarily what they're asking for or what they want.
That's for sure.
Right? It's
Yeah.
what do they need, and so to that end, empathy can feel very tough to people, and they can fight against it, I guess, right? Because you're not giving them
In the
what they're asking
beginning,
for, what
but
they
I
want.
think if you sit and really sit with someone and they get it that you get it, I think there's a physiological response that happens. And we know this from attachment studies with mom and baby. And that's why, okay, let me just say this so I don't forget. The number one robust predictor of who's going to do well in therapy is not whether they're getting CBT or DBT or IPT or EFT or any of those T's. In fact, I have a slide, I have a talk I do, and I show all those, and then I have the Dalai Lama, and I go, or a cup of tea, and he's just sitting there drinking a cup of tea, because because there are all these ways that we make someone feel safe and comfortable and trusted. And in psychotherapy, if you don't have that, it doesn't matter the model.
No.
So there's all this research now that shows this. And the two top things in the research, and there's a few, but the two main ones are whether the client feels there's empathy from the therapist. And so it creates this resonance between the two, and collaboration, which is what you do really with that empathic response. I don't say to someone, "Oh, I empathize with your anorexia and I know you don't want to gain weight, so I get it. You don't really have to. I get it, you know." I collaborate though and say, "Let's go really slow. Let's see how much you can eat without gaining weight, because you're going to be better off if you're eating,
Right.
at least if you're eating more." And we won't even start with weight gain, you know. I
Right.
don't start off with like a lot of programs that will say, "Okay, you weigh 85 pounds and your ideal body weight is 130, so you have to gain the weight." And like to me, that's like taking someone with a snake phobia and saying, "You're going to have to hold 130 snakes before you leave this program." I would leave if I
Yeah,
was.
of course. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So I think you still, yeah, it's having empathy and being able to, yeah, I guess this keeps coming up, right? Being able to challenge at the same time, and being able, and always going back to what did you hire me for, you know?
Yeah, and I think it comes through in skills that I cover in my coaching, for example, which are are also part of, I'm sure, how you deal with patients. Like the skill of validation, like validating what somebody feels. Like it must feel really tough to to be experiencing that right now in your shoes. I might feel the same way. Is separate and distinct from agreeing with their perspective if they've kind of got it all bent out of shape and they're not really sort of framing it in an accurate way, right? You've got to validate that feeling before you can actually move into a problem solving mode or get permission
Yeah,
even to move into a
yeah,
problem solving mode, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Because it drops the shield when you do
Yeah,
that.
right.
The
So
barrier.
we've got some amazing comments coming in, and we haven't talked to anybody, and there's so many great comments. And Jay can throw up some of them. First of all, my husband said that can you find Steve's comment? There you go. This is Steve, my husband. Look at that picture. Look at that picture. He's going to be quoting at this one at me all day.
Uh-oh, I think that's going to be used against you in some
He's
way.
upstairs watching.
I do want to say something though, because I'm afraid I'm going to forget. I
Go
want
on.
people to know that the research is showing that empathy is becoming less. That I think from the year 2000, college students are displaying a 40% drop in their scores on empathy surveys. And the reason a lot is is that we don't have this. Oh, I forgot to get to the mother daughter gaze and all that stuff. But there's so much technology. We're doing this and we're not looking at each other. We're not sitting with each other. We're not touching each other. There's so much time spent with kids on devices that it's harder to learn empathy that way. I don't think it's impossible, but I think that's a big reason why. Okay, now you can talk about what people are saying.
Yeah. And also, like, now to look at somebody means to look at a green light on a computer when you not actually look at them. It's like everything's topsy-turvy. It doesn't actually make any sense anymore. Deep resonance. Can you tell us more about that, Carolyn? It's a question from Amelia.
Yeah, it's when you feel felt and you can let the other person, and the other person knows that you feel them feeling you.
It's a
So
true connection.
So there comes this exchange, this resonance of we get each other, we understand each other, and we are in this together, even if it's just for this moment and you're sitting here with me during this time.
That's what I felt with you the first time we met, honestly.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I told you I thought there was we realized we were people with high empathy.
All right, enough about us. We're going to be saying get a room. Okay, let's have a look at the question. Let's have a look at the comments.
Okay.
Mirror touch by Dr. Joel Salinas talks about feeling the another's pain, mirror neurons.
Okay, let me talk about mirror neurons for a second. Mirror neurons are fascinating. Oh my God, they're fascinating. And the way they discovered them was this working with macaque monkeys, and they were looking at their motor neurons and how they get them to do things. And so it went something like this. The researcher went out of the room or something. Anyway, then the researcher comes back in and he goes for a cup. And the brains on this monkeys were wired, and the part of the monkey brain that lights up when the monkey grabs a cup lit up watching the researcher grab the cup. So they were like, what is going on? This monkey can watch and see me, and the same part of the brain lights up when he sees me doing it. That's a mirror neuron. So it happens and that we've studied it in babies, and it's only in a few, I think, primates, elephants, dolphins. Not many animals have mirror neurons. But like at the research for babies, and here's the fascinating part about why teaching is important and experience is important, showing is important. If you hold a banana to your mouth, a baby, that part of the baby's brain where the baby can hold it to their mouth, but if it's before the baby's ever used a spoon and you take a spoon and hold it out, nothing lights up because there's no experience. There's no way. It takes a while for the baby to have the spoon to the mouth for a while before those mirror neurons light up. So it also has to do with experience. And like I said, my mom talked to me as she was explaining things about the way I was feeling about somebody and the way that other person might be feeling. So so empathy breeds empathy. The more we have experiences like that, the more we can build on them. That's what I think.
But I think when you tell that story about your mom, I think your mom was also teaching you how to think.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, sure.
Because you were reacting, right, not responding, and she was teaching you how to think so that then you could be more genuinely empathic in your own response. So cognitively, you could get it first before then you could feel it.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it's all these layers,
Yeah.
I'm sure there are people that will say, oh, I understand mirror neurons a little differently, or I understand the difference between sympathy and empathy. When you start looking, you can go on a website and see the difference between empathy and sympathy and go to the next one. It'll be the reversed. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
But I think what's important for people to keep in mind is what we're really talking about is the ability to be in somebody else's shoes and to get it, not as us getting it like if it happened to us, but as us getting it as it happened to them.
And that is a perfect way to wrap us up.
Oh God, are
because
we
we're at
done?
the end, Carolyn. Can you believe it?
Oh God, I have a lot of things to say.
Well, will you come back and maybe you can come back and you can open the season for us in March when we come back. How about that?
Okay, because there's
Good.
so much about. Can I just say, mindfulness practices help.
Go on.
Mindfulness practices help because they
You do.
strengthen the prefrontal cortex and help override our emotional brain, the part that gets upset, the part that gets afraid. And so there's no doubt. And I mean, there's huge levels of empathy in like sitting monks, but they don't overreact because they've been calmed, but they still have the empathy. But it's a way to protect yourself, if especially if you're already an empathic person.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. I have so
100%.
much more, but I'll wait.
So much more about. We'll do an episode on mindfulness. How about that?
Okay.
Okay. So
All
that's how we're going to start season 3, season 2. We already know, and you're going to be my first guest.
Okay.
Amazing.
Great.
Thank you, Carolyn, for giving us your time today and for sharing your wisdom with us. It's been, as always, an absolute joy and pleasure to get to be in a room with you, even if it's not a real one. At least
Yeah.
get to spend time together.
Well, thank
Thank
you.
you.
I'm excited about it. Now I have to go pull people aside and say, "Do you want to know what I know about empathy? Because I've been thinking about it for a week now." Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank
I
you,
love you.
Carolyn. And that's it. That's the wrap, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're a little bit over time, so I'm going to shut up and go to titles. But this was the last episode of the season. We'll be back in March with a brand new season and lots of amazing guests. So stay tuned for that. And you can find us at #WideOff across all platforms. So I'll see you next time.